Imagine that you are or were in a bad relationship. And maybe you weren't that happy about it, but you know, it was better than no relationship at all. And then the person that you were in a relationship betrayed you. And maybe they did that because you actually weren't that happy with the relationship anyways. Maybe they did that because you were a little bit naive. Or maybe they did that because you were a little bit too easy to get along with, and as a consequence a little bit on the boring side. And so when they first leave you, it's a catastrophe because your world falls apart. If you fall into a big pit and you get really hurt, the first thing you should figure out is how to not fall into big pits anymore. And your mind is set up exactly for that. And so what you do with someone who's having problems like that is you walk them through it. You do a situational analysis first, because one of the oversimplifications that people make, and this is especially true for conscientious people, is if something bad happened to me, I must have done something to deserve it. That's actually a pretty functional idea, because it suggests that there are things about your behavior that you could change that would make the future better. But the problem is that, say if it's the collapse of a relationship and you've been with that person for 8 years or longer, you did so many things with them that the idea that you did something wrong pretty much extends to every single thing you ever did with them. How are you going to fix that? And so that's part of the trauma, actually. The trauma is 80 million snakes all at the same time. Forget it. You don't have time to go through all that material. Partly what you do is with people, and this is what you should do with yourself too, is you do a situational analysis. Don't be assuming necessarily that the thing that happened to you only happened to you because of what you did or didn't do. There's all sorts of factors at play. So one of the things that sometimes I do with clients is, if they were in a relationship and I can get some reasonable personality information about both of them, I can point out where they were temperamentally incompatible. If you're a highly conscientious person and your partner is very, very low in conscientiousness, good luck to you two. How the hell are you ever going to work that out? Because you want everything to be exactly where it's supposed to be, and you're working all the time, and your partner could care less whether things were where they're supposed to be, and they're not going to work. And you can butt heads about that forever. The probability that you're going to shift it, except to some minor degree, is very, very low. And so sometimes you end up with someone with whom you get along very well on one temperamental dimension, and you're an absolute catastrophe on the other 4. And the probability that you're going to be able to mediate a huge temperamental difference is extremely low. You wouldn't expect yourself to mediate a huge intellectual difference. You're going to make the other person smarter, or maybe you smarter, depending on who you're with. No, probably not. A bit, maybe. You do a situational analysis. And so what you're trying to do is to extract out information from your past and your present that will enable you to conduct yourself properly into the future. It's possible to learn something new in that place. So you might learn, for example, that you should be a little sharper the next time that you go out with someone. Or you should be a little bit more careful about picking up on clues that your partner's bored with you. Or that maybe you should stop associating with lying psychopaths. And what that means now and then is that when you fall into the belly of a whale and you're swallowed up by something that lurks underneath, that you can come out the other side transformed. And that's actually how people learn. Every time you learn something, you learn because something you didn't work. And that exposes you to the part of the world that you don't understand. Every time you're exposed to a part of the world that you don't understand, you have the possibility of rebuilding the structures that you use to interpret the world. That's often why it's more important to notice that you're wrong than it is to prove that you're right. And not only that, that's essentially what gives life its meaning. The Buddhists say life is suffering. And you think, if that's the case, why bother with it? And people do ask that question, and they ask it in ways that result in their own destruction, and worse, in the destruction of others. So for example, people who become particularly cruel, particularly in a genocidal manner, are more than willing to dispense with as many human beings as they can possibly train their sights on, because they're so disgusted by the nature of human limitation that they'd rather eradicate it. And lots of people become suicidal because they can't bear the conditions of their own existence. And suffering is real, and it's inescapable. So the question is, what do you do about it? You notice in your own life, and you can do this by watching your own life. Now, I often ask my clients to do this. Say, look, watch your life for a week and pretend you don't know who you are, because you don't know who you are at all. What you understand most about yourself are the arbitrary presuppositions that you use to hem yourself in. And you act as if those presuppositions are true, so that the revelation of the full nature of your character won't terrify you. People hide in their own boxes, and it's not surprising, but it's not a good idea, because life is too hard to hide in a box. You can't manage it if you do that. If you watch yourself for a week, you'll see certain things. You'll see some of the time that you're resentful and annoyed. And those are times when you're either taking advantage of yourself or you're thinking improperly. Some of the time you'll be bored, in which case you're either undisciplined or you're probably pursuing something you don't want to pursue. And some of the time you'll actually be engaged in life. And the times that you're engaged in life, you won't notice that you're there. The distinction between subject and object disappears when you're engaged in something that you find meaningful. The purpose of life, as far as I can tell from studying mythology and from studying psychology for decades, is to find a mode of being that's so meaningful that the fact that life is suffering is no longer relevant. Or maybe that it's even acceptable. And I would say as well that people know when they're doing that. When you're doing that in part because you're no longer resentful. You think, geez, I could do this forever. There's a timelessness that's associated with that state of being. From a mythological perspective, that's equivalent to brief habitation of the kingdom of God. That's the place where you are that's so meaningful that it enables you to bear the harsh preconditions of life without becoming resentful, bitter, or cruel. And there's nothing that you can pursue in your life that will be half as useful as that. Your nervous system, being an evolved structure, is evolved for a universe that is composed of the interaction between chaos and order. Those are the most fundamental constants that we know. They transcend the mere perception of objects.